Happy Tuesday morning, everybody, from Mystery Island. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. And today I'm very excited to bring back to the show our good friend, David Cranmer Underdown. And the topic today is Chicago. What's going on with the Pritzker family? So we're going to get some insight from David Cranmer Underdown in about 30 seconds. Stick around. And hello again, everybody. I am John O'Loughlin, and welcome to McDuff Lives. And, David Cranmer Underdown has been my guest on, I don't know, maybe 100 shows in the past 5 years. And it's always a pleasure. But we never talk about Chicago. We're always talking about Detroit. Well, Chicago is my kind of town, said Frank Sinatra. What do you think, David?
It's a great city. It's one of the world's great cities, and it's an easy drive from Detroit. And a lot of people from Michigan end up there, and it's a place full of history. It's a great city.
Well, speaking of history, I have a kind of a sardonic question for you to start off with. Has there ever been a time that Chicago was not corrupt?
The history of Michigan and Illinois is deeply tied, and we'll get into that for sure. But in modern times, it's famous for being the Windy City and having the corrupt politicians, and of course, the Chicago outfit had the famous, Al Capone trials in the 30s. So it has a lot of intrigue for sure.
Well, the Mayor Pritzker, said the other day, I think it was yesterday, Donald Trump, don't come to Chicago. Don't come to Chicago. Now, that's not nice for a mayor to say to the president of the United States. What's behind this, David?
Well, he's the governor. J.B. Pritzker is the governor, so they're a very, I talk about them, from time to time. They're obviously one of the important families that is involved in the combination of banking and finance and industry, arts, and then intelligence. They have rich history with Chicago and the Chicago outfit and sort of those intrigues. The Pritzkers are one of the major families, and of course they have the old relationships with Warren Buffett through Marmon and also through doing cocoa bean trading in the 50s with them. So there's an intriguing combo of Warren Buffett's interests and then the Pritzker family of Chicago.
Wow, the famous cocoa bean trading of the 50s, which nobody's ever heard about.
No, but it's
also important.
Well, because I think that the cocoa bean and of course the United Fruit Company we talk a lot about, and United Fruit was one of the major growers of agricultural and produce in Central and South America, and they also had the logistics system with the Great White Fleet to move the goods around. And so that's part of the history of the cocoa beans to me is always mysterious. It's sort of like the cocoa leaves that used to be used for Coca-Cola, and then they later had the Mellencrout pharmaceutical company of St. Louis that ended up getting the cocaine remains that was then you're able to distribute it through the trusted ears, nose, and throat doctors of America.
Mellencrout. Yeah, I looked into them 5 or 6 years ago, and the history of that, and they have an exclusive contract to import cocaine, if I'm not mistaken. The government said, okay, you guys got the cocaine deal. Mm-hmm. Dealing cards to people from the position of the White House. You can have this one, and you can have that one. Sounds just like the old kings of England back in the Middle Ages saying, here, you collect the taxes, you just get whatever you can and keep 20%, and I'll take the rest. Just these concessions, and wow. But I didn't know the Pritzkers were involved. Obviously, I don't know much about the Pritzkers because I mistook that he was a mayor, but he's actually the governor. But of course, I've done a little bit of poking around, and it turns out to be this is yet another Ukrainian Jewish family of origin. Do you want to go back and bring us forward from when the Pritzker first came here and bring it a little bit forward for historical
Yeah,
purposes if you can. I don't know if you have.
I don't know the old history. I mean, I know that they came from Kiev and Ukraine, and then they immigrated to Chicago, and then became incredibly successful with their first venture was the Hyatt um, hotels and real estate venture, and they were involved in hospitality, and then they got into this Marmon Group, which is the Union tank, John D. Rockefeller's Union tank car business, where they're making the tank car is you have the engine car on a train. The tank cars are the remaining, uh, you know, cars on a train, and the Union tank car was the largest maker of that, and it was rebranded Marmon. And Union Tank is also interesting because Detroit has a rich history with the tank car building before the auto industry. A lot of the industrialists that's led into the auto were involved in the Union Tank car, and people like Robert Freer, who was he was a tank car industrialist, but then he later donates his art to the National Gallery and a lot of famous paintings. And there's a connection between the art world, the architecture world, banking, and industry that's really rich with this group.
Number of years ago, I started realizing that art was a great way to launder money. And I'm sure that's part of it. But a lot of these families that come over from Europe under stressful times, like a pogrom or other problems that are imposed or fall upon the common people, and they come over here, and I have to wonder, did they have some connection with money before, or are these people that brought some money with them, or is it really a rags to riches, or much more likely, I guess, is that they got involved with the Chicago outfit? Again, the name Hyatt, I thought perhaps that name Hyatt went back to Hyattsville, Maryland, or some other Hyatts. But how did that connection develop? And then comment on what I just asked you.
Sure. So the in the teens around World War I, they had a British intelligence officer named William Wiseman that was sent to New York to set up the Section 5, which was the intelligence. And so he had two key proteges. The one was the famous Canadian named William Stevenson that became the head of the British Security Coordination in the Rockefeller Center. The other key protege was named Julius Klein, and he was a newsman from Chicago. And Julius Klein was the one that was the mentor of Max Fisher, who is the local Detroit person that's related with the Chicago outfit and with the Purple Gang. The Purple Gang, of course, has the Kennedy connections because there was supposedly a hit put out on Joseph Kennedy for rum running over the Purple Gang's turf, and then it was Sam Giancana of the Chicago outfit was the one that brokered the peace between the Kennedy interests and the Chicago outfit and the Purple Gang. And of course, this is intriguing because the Kennedy family, I feel like, makes a strong point of saying that he wasn't involved in illegal prohibition, rum running, but he was the, part of the Somerset imports in 1933 with Jimmy Roosevelt, the son of the president. So, and that was, of course, in the 30s, and then with the intrigues of JFK in the 1960 election against Nixon, the Chicago outfit comes up again as a key interest.
Well, let's go there for a minute because I've just been doing a series of shows called Undo the Coup, and as a result of the recent revelations and research I've been doing, it's my opinion. I could be wrong, but it's my opinion that the whole Kennedy assassination was a mafia hit, and that the other people that were involved are simply the people that either let it happen on purpose or made it happen on purpose. But in every case, from the FBI to the military to the CIA to everybody else you can look at, they all just stood aside and let it happen, and then they folded up the investigation so that we'd never know why. And I think, the theory that Giancana and the mafia, the Chicago mob, supported the election of John F. Kennedy with the Illinois vote, as well as the West Virginia, if I recall, that and some money, a lot of money, that Giancana felt like he was being betrayed when JFK didn't assist them in getting Cuba back from the communists. And to me, that's like mafia rules. That's a mafia betrayal. And whether LBJ wanted to get rid of him or Allen Dulles or anybody else wanted to get rid of him, the fact is that, under mafia rules, it's pretty fair game to just off the guy after he's failed to fulfill what looks like a deal between Joe Kennedy, his father, and Sam Giancana and the Chicago mob.
And also the Merchandise Mart is an important landmark in Chicago that ties to the Kennedy family. And of course, Sergeant Shriver was the manager of that project in Chicago. And that's the relationship with the Marshall Fields family. And of course, Marshall Fields is the one that donated the land to the University of Chicago to have, John D. Rockefeller and the Baptist Church reincorporate the University of Chicago after the fire. And that is the Marshall Field interest. And that, of course, was the major dry goods trader in Chicago, with Sears Roebuck being the other major, department store that became department stores. And those, the department stores are important because they were the what became the trade ports, or the places of exchange on things like the Hudson Bay Company or John Jacob Astor's American Fur Company, which was the precursor of the Chicago outfit, was American Fur. And that, of course, had the dealing with Russian American fur when Astor went to the West Coast and started doing the opium trading with the East India Company. And then, of course, he took his profits to New York City, where he acquired Aaron Burr's real estate holdings that gave up. And then the Astors get into the Cliveden set and those interests as well with the Empire State Building. So there's a lot of intrigue that comes from Mackinac Island and the fur trading that was Hudson Bay, American Fur, and Northwest Company were the three fur trading tycoons of the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Seaway, which is what we're talking about, connecting to the Mississippi River.
And that was the whole reason that Chicago became a town in the first place, was to connect the St. Lawrence Freeway to the Mississippi River, if I recall.
And it's also the Knights of the Golden Circle, kind of their idea to connect the Ohio River Valley and have the, Baltimore to the Pittsburgh connection, and then to be able to take Ohio River to the Mississippi. And then you have your, waterway logistics system for the new territory, including, leaving the Mississippi in the port of New Orleans, giving you access to the Gulf of Mexico. And then, of course, with the creation of the Panama Canal, that changes the dynamics of the East and the West Coast in a similar fashion to the Transcontinental Railroad.
Go back for a moment to Marshall, to the Mart, the Chicago, that Joe Kennedy bought into. How did he get a piece of that, and why did he get a piece of that? Or I guess he owns it, right?
Yeah, I think he owned it. I mean, it was, it was they said for years that was the, income that, funded the Kennedy fortune was the merchandise mart. Um, it's it, and again, like Joe Kennedy, I believe was involved in the hotels and gaming in Cuba with Meyer Lansky and with that network as well. So he was a stakeholder in some of the Cuban real estate and gaming plays as well. So, like I said, I mean Kennedy's a very complicated character, and he also has the relationships with the Roosevelt family. He was the very first SEC chairman in 1933, and he brought on lawyers that became Supreme Court justices like William Douglas, and also the uh, Abe Fortas was also part of his SEC enforcement division, which is now the Melissa Hodgman, the wife of Peter Strzok, is in that SEC enforcement division where they're kind of doing, who are we going to investigate and who are we not? And so that was all part of the 1933 Banking Act. The SEC and the FDIC were part of the Glass-Steagall project.
Now, I've also read that the Pritzkers were connected to the Rockefellers. So can you connect those two for us?
Well, the Rockefellers had they had the McCormick, and so it's Robert McCormick, I think, married John D. Rockefeller's sister, and she was the first person to like go to Switzerland and work with Carl Jung and really brought the psychology. And then her husband was the third founding member of the Rockefeller Foundation. So there's a very old connection between the Rockefellers and the newspaper interests of the McCormicks, and then there's the Medill family that started the Chicago Tribune, and that was acquired it, and that was that was a big part of the University of Chicago interest as well, which they were part of the founding group of that. So as far as like directly tying them to the Rockefellers, I think the Marmon connection is the number one, because that was John D. Rockefeller's Union tank business that was then rebranded as Marmon, and then Warren Buffett was their partner in that acquisition. That was his big play with the Pritzkers, was Marmon, which is one of the kind of under the radar manufacturing companies where they're making tank cars. But if you have a facility where you can build a tank car, which is like a railroad car, then you could probably retrofit those types of facilities if you wanted to do like munitions or make tanks or weapons of war. Those are the kind of factories that you can work with to get manufacturing of in times of war.
How about Hyatt? Where does the name Hyatt come into this?
Hyatt reminds me of the Ford Airport, because it was their competitive advantage was they were the ones that brought airport hotels, and having a hotel next to an airport where you would drive and then you would fly to another airport, and then you would, the rent-a-car business comes out of this also. But they were I don't know the origin of the name, but they're also involved in technology. There was a let's see, I'm trying to think what the airline. Banff Airlines was a airline that they were involved in, and that was that took over the Pan Am, South American air routes, and that was that was they had a computer system that they used for their ticketing and for the airlines that then became like Hyatt Education Systems, and that was part of the acquisition. So again, like I don't know exactly the specifics of it, but they were involved in airline travel, changing from travel by train and cars to that. So they were involved in hospitality, but many areas. They're a big family with lots of areas.
Now, what about the connection to Rahm Emanuel, the one-time mayor or long-time mayor of Chicago, and the whole Emanuel family? Can you are the
Sure.
Pritzkers involved in that?
I mean, I don't know the histories of these families. Like the Detroit families, like where I went to school with people, or like they were customers or a dry cleaner. Like I know the network very, very well. I don't know the
Mhm.
Pritzkers network nearly as well. So I place them as in partnerships, just like in my mental model, but I don't know that all to be, you know, that they have these direct relationships. But I also look at things like Thomas Pritzker currently being the head of CSIS, which was the Georgetown think tank where Henry Kissinger came in '77 and Brzezinski, and that became a very important place for military strategic thinkers in the realm that you were talking about yesterday with the Saxa and the Office of Technical Services and all these different areas. The CSIS was founded by Admiral Burke. He was the naval admiral. So there's a naval intelligence
That
kind of
was in
flavor to
Kennedy's
this
time,
also.
wasn't it? That
What's
was in
that?
JFK's time, wasn't it, Burke?
I think so. Yeah, he
Yeah.
was. Yeah, but it's
CNO. Interesting.
yeah. So that was, and again, it makes it confusing because you have Georgetown University, which you think of as John Carroll founding the Georgetown being the Catholic university, and then you have um, Kissinger really setting up there as not seemingly having the Catholic interests at the forefront, but he's there with Brzezinski, who is a strong Catholic.
Something that's one of the dimensions of our time that people are kind of happy to not look into, and that is, which ones are Catholics, But I think after studying Francis Spellman, Cardinal Spellman, and the connections with that, and then the unfortunate General Joseph F. Carroll, who was drafted to head the DIA, and then the disasters that come out of that. I mean, that was a combination, I suspect, of Henry Kissinger and the Roman Catholic Church supporting initially DM, but ultimately a project to, well, in name to roll back communism, but in fact to establish a capitalist-friendly regime in Vietnam that they could profit from. And of course, all the souls that they wanted to gather for their church. But yeah, Georgetown. I'm a graduate of Georgetown University Law Center, as not everybody knows. And I did attend a seminar at the Foreign Schools Service School once, and decided I didn't want to go in that direction. But yes, Georgetown is fascinating in so many ways, and of course, let's not forget it's a Jesuit institution. It's not just a cafeteria Catholic place. It's a very, very specific and very top down organization that has deep, deep interests in the history and also in the wealth of Europe and other countries, and had no problem with the exploitation of all, as you spoke of the British East India Company and how they had Catholic priests out there doing the indoctrination, in India and other places. So
And the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence had all the Jesuit priests. That's why all the names are French.
uh-huh.
Hmm.
Yeah.
But John Carroll was the mentor of Gabrielle Richard that moved to Michigan and was at St. Anne's, and St. Anne's was the Catholic Church, the first building in Detroit, in Fort Detroit. And then he was one of the co-founders of the University of Michigan. So you had, again, you know, the Augustus Woodward was the friend of Thomas Jefferson, that did the plan for Detroit, using L'Enfant's plan. And then you had the Gabriel Richard, and then um, the third founder of the University of Michigan was a Protestant, minister in Detroit. So you had sort of different interests at the University of Michigan, which is always interesting to me. But I went to Boston College for undergrad, so I was in the Carroll School of Business there, which is named after John Carroll. So I, didn't grow up Catholic, but I had, we had a lot of parochial schools that we played sports against, and I know a lot of people that went to the Catholic rivalries in Detroit, especially for like high school football and stuff. You can really, it's really strong. They have great athletics, and those, um, those kids that go to those schools dream of going to Georgetown and Notre Dame and Boston College and Marquette and these different schools. And that was partly why when I went to Boston College I didn't feel like I fit in as well, as because I didn't have that childhood experience of sort of like dreaming of going to the prestigious school. And I explained my friend Paul, whose grandma was like literally like shaking. She was so proud that they had two cardinals at our graduation. And, for me, it was just like, I didn't know the significance of that, but I could tell that for her, it was, an incredible honor for her family to be involved in that event.
And that sounds so much like Joseph F. Carroll's son that wrote the book American Requiem, James Carroll, I think. And James Carroll was ordained in a similar manner, and his mother was practically, floated up to heaven when two cardinals showed up at his ordination, if I recall. And that kind of mystique, it didn't really exist for me growing up. I grew up in a very Protestant area, but the vestige and the continuation of the Catholic Church has been all around, but it wasn't really all that integrated into the society the way it would have been up in the Northwest, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
And well, instead of going there, let's go back, because I know a lot of people want to answer or want to get your opinion on what's really going on in Chicago right now,
Mm-hmm.
with Pritzkers saying no to Donald Trump's proposal to bring National Guard and federal troops up to Chicago. And there's a number of theories of why Trump is doing this. I guess we could talk about it in DC too, but Chicago seems to me to be the center of so much intrigue and so much mafia history,
Mm-hmm.
that the idea that he's going there to clean it up could be either he's going there to clean the homeless people off the streets, or he could be there to clean up the mob, or it all could be just a feint, because the real target is immigrants, and to go up there and use this excuse to this crime excuse, which he says is a national emergency. And I don't know why it's a national emergency suddenly, but he's using his emergency powers to do this. Pritzker says no. What can we learn from this, and what can we expect?
Well, I think that I wasn't really aware that this was going on. I hadn't seen that, but it just makes me think of the riots in Detroit and other places in '67 and '68, and how the governors worked with the president Johnson to bring in the National Guard to assist in Detroit specifically. I know Baltimore and Cleveland and Newark and other areas had um, these response. I mean, there was a lot that was going on in that period. I mean, you had the '68 convention, you had all these leaders that were assassinated. So I don't know what Trump's, and again, Trump, like, he did his story about going into Manhattan, which was his dream that his father never achieved, of being the developer in the Bronx. He partners in the Commodore Hotel, which is named after the Commodore Vanderbilt. but his 50-50 partner in the deal is the Pritzkers and Hyatt. So Trump goes back with the Pritzkers, and Roy Cohn, of course, was the deal luber and that thing. So to me, this is like similar to when they were going to have Trump go after Rupert Murdoch, and that Murdoch was the bad publisher, but they were the Rupert Murdoch and Donald Trump were the first two clients of Black, Manafort, and Stone in 1980 when they, after Roger Stone leaves as Roy Cohn's bagman driver in 1980, they start the consulting firm, and their first two clients are, Trump Organization and Rupert Murdoch, who is, in a couple of years was going to go in and take over the, 21st Century Fox from Mark Rich and Pincus Green and Marvin Davis. And so he, takes that over, and then Trump later goes on to take over the Resorts International, which, he's got the Wilbur Ross financing, and then then Merv Griffin comes in, and there's a proxy fight, and they split it up, and Jersey goes to Trump, and the Paradise Island goes to Merv. And Merv is backed by the, Drexel Burnham Lambert money. He's got Michael Milken as his banker. So to me, like, these are all like old legacy plays, and I'm sure Trump's aware of it. But I always think of the lawsuit that was brought against the Trump Organization in the 70s by the Justice Department of Civil Rights when they sued the Trump Organization, and Roy Cohn was the lawyer. And the person from the Justice Department that brought that action was J. Stanley Pottinger, whose son, Matt Pottinger, becomes the Deputy National Security Advisor. So, and I say this a lot, like our family had a dry cleaning business in Birmingham, Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. When I was in first grade, we came back from the midwinter break vacation, and there was a strike at our store, and there were picketers, and they wanted to put a union into our dry cleaning business. And I remember it so specifically. I remember all the characters, the main characters, the lawyers, and everything. So if I'm Donald Trump and it's 1974 or whatever, and the Justice Department is saying that you're racist, you have illegal rental policies to Blacks and Puerto Ricans, and that you're the Justice Department Civil Rights Division is going after you. I would remember Stan Pottinger very clearly. He was dating Gloria Steinem. He was the Deep Throat, knew the Deep Throat characters. He was, George Bush picked up on the first ring when he'd call. I'd remember that. And then, of course, when his son, later goes into the National Security Advisor, a Deputy National Security Advisor, that is mixed signals from me. So I don't know what he how I imagine this is going is they're wargaming it out, and they're trying to have John Bolton be like the lone wolf, that they, throw John Bolton to the wolf, and everybody forgets everybody else and doesn't remember that Bolton goes, all the way back to Yale when he was, roommates with Clarence Thomas, when, Bill and Hillary Clinton were at Yale Law School. He worked with David Keene for Spiro Agnew. Like, that was the same David Keene that was with Maria Butina, in the 2016. He's the NRA head. So to me, it's all the same characters, and I don't know how they'll play it. I mean, obviously Trump will want to play it where he's the deal maker and the negotiator and everything, and that's hopefully will happen, and it'll be like a good resolution. But it is it's the Chicago outfit. They're rough players, the roughest players. So he knows it. I mean, he's, like I said, Pritzkers were his 50-50 partner in the Hyatt Commodore. So he's known them for a long time.
That is so fascinating. I hope that you're going to teach a graduate level course on this someday, David. You've got such a command of it, and I'm really grateful for your sharing all this information with us. So I left out one of the other theories about why Trump would want to bring the military to Chicago, and that is to just solidify the powers that exist there already, and to impose a real fascist system that can't be opposed because of the amount of federal guns and power that's that will just keep anybody down that wanted to fight, the Chicago system?
The thing about the Chicago system too is that like people think of the mafia and Al Capone, and then later uh, the Sidney Korshak and that group that really people think of more as being Hollywood, LA people. But a lot of those characters came from Chicago, but also through University of Chicago is so important because that was where Albert Wohlstetter was a teacher for years. Wohlstetter was the one that was in the Rand strategy group, but he was the first founder of Team B, which was in 1976 when Bush became CIA director. They created this Team B think tank at Harvard, and it was Albert Wohlstetter and Richard Pipes that led this. And Wohlstetter is the mentor to Richard Pearl, who was working with Scoop Jackson when they did the Jackson-Varick agreement, which was a key interest in the Edgar Bronfman, who later became the World Jewish Congress chairman. That was to take oppressed intellectual talent in Russia and then have them immigrate to Israel or America and sort of get them out of a bad situation. And then the Jackson-Varick repeal is actually the name of what the Magnitsky Act. So Magnitsky Act is the nickname for the Jackson-Varick Repeal Act. So they actually repealed that. And when Edgar Bronfman was the head of the World Jewish Congress, he talked a lot about that issue. So the immigration from Russia. So I feel like a lot of and Team B was also the group that really focused on the Russian communist threat being the main national security threat.
I was looking aside to get a reference for the Castle Bank, the Castle Bank, which was Paul Hellawell's, and I note that the Pritzker family, at least according to the book Supermob by Gus Russo, which I, for the record, have not read, but I've seen a lot of excerpts and comments on it. I need to read that one. The connection now to this offshore tax haven money laundering center that existed for I think about 10 or 12 years until it got busted, and then they moved their operation to the Nugan Bank that we described yesterday. Mm-hmm. So the Pritzkers are involved in using these kind of really CIA creations in order to launder money and avoid taxes. And is that how they got so wealthy? Marcia just told me that Pritzker is like by far the wealthiest politician in the national scene right now. How can we figure out how he got so rich?
Well, the cocoa bean deal may have brought some money into the family, and yeah, as you said, the Castle Bank and Trust was started by Paul Hellawell and a guy named Burton Cantor. Hellawell has the history with the Civil Air Transport, which mm-hmm. was George Duell, and that was the CIA creating this logistics network using cargo planes, and that was the Evergreen Air, Southern Air Transport, Air America, all comes out of this Civil Air Transport network that Paul Hellawell was the financial person that put it together, where George Duell was more of the operational, person that set up the airports and figured out which types of planes and staffing and whatnot that they did. But that was that, and then Hellawell was also doing the financing for the Bay of Pigs, through Andros Island. He had the relationships with Meyer Lansky. He worked for him later. He was involved with B.B. Rebozo, who we talk about being the pool buddy of Nixon, and also the partner of Adnan Khashoggi. You can't forget Adnan in this time, because you had the Lockheed scandal, in 72. This is when Prince Bernard goes down, and then they have the federal bailout for Lockheed. But the broker for this Lockheed material was Adnan Khashoggi, and then he's the one that founds the Safari Club in 1976, just a couple months before Team B comes in, and that's where George they create the BCCI Bank with that, and then you have George H.W. Bush as a silent partner, and then Henry Kissinger is the non-official architect of it, as in not America was not officially a Safari Club member. So
Well, this is all just so overwhelming, and here I sit trying to promote the preservation of the Constitution of the United States for the citizens that are supposedly, going to be vigilant, as Benjamin Franklin warned us. And yet we have people like Aldous Huxley saying, well, most people really don't want to get involved in politics. They're just happy if they get to, fulfill their expectations and to have a decent meal and a decent life. And, they don't really want to get too involved in politics. So that principle seems to have won out over the idea of Franklin that we were all going to have to be vigilant citizens. And of course, the punchline is, if you have to be vigilant if you want to keep this democracy, you have to be vigilant. The press, the media, the banks, the politicians, the political parties especially, are all about facilitating deals. I love the phrase that you said a little while ago about Roy Cohn, the deal luber.
he is. That was his role.
Yeah.
With Strategic Defense Initiative too, with Edward Teller, and he was also in Western Goals, which was the Enterprise with Singlaub and the characters that you were referencing that were in the Secret War in Laos, and then got involved in the very same civil air patrol or civil air transport activities that was the AIG, and Cornelius van der Star was critical in that, and then they had the private secretary of Wild Bill Donovan was Duncan Lee, that was also part of the Verona scandal that became the chief counsel of AIG. And then later, Frank Wisner and Polly Wisner's son, Frank Jr., becomes the chief counsel of AIG in the 1980s. So there's a lot of overlap between all of the OSS people and how they, which road they took after the National Security Act.
I don't see a lot of fighting here between the Republicans and the Democrats. It sounds to me like, they're all, in that big club that George Carlin told us about and that we're not in. They're all in the big club and making deals and without any care whatsoever for the Constitution or the rights of American citizens generally. It's the way it is now. I suppose it was that way before Kennedy was killed, but at least before Kennedy was killed, we had we the voters had a strong sense that we could control things by the elections. And now, when they just decide to off him because he's inconvenient or for whatever particular reason Mafia might have had, since then, I don't think that we've really got a chance to restore the power of the Constitution that is the founding document of our country. Undo the coup is what I say over and over again, and I think it's catching on. Anyway, to try to get back to a democracy in this mess, it's just I don't know. Do you have any advice for me as to how to get us back there?
Well, I do think that it is the vigilant citizen and being educated and feeling confident that you do have a rough understanding of the network, so you don't just completely believe something that is suspect and not use your instinct to be question whether a story makes sense. But as far as like, I do the calls on Monday night, and someone was talking about how they were disappointed. They were somebody that had gone to Berkeley and was involved in a lot of the civil rights activities in Northern California, and so they had this um, protest type background, see something, say something, and they were very disappointed that the young people didn't didn't get outraged or moved to action. And my analysis of that is that there's so many demoralization tactics that are used where people are just destabilized and they don't feel comfortable with their understanding of things. So that's why things like pro sports or other interests are so popular, is because I feel like, and I was talking about this also, like when I was little, such a strong memory for me was going into the sports stadiums as a little kid and hearing the sounds of the stadium, and the crowd goes wild and the marching band takes the field and all this stuff. And the way that could really like unify the crowd, and people would sing the song and wear the colors and all that, like it's powerful. It's very powerful in um, group psychology and feeling connected to something. And I that's what is lacking, is I feel like there isn't a um, confidence to feel like you're backing the right team. A lot of people, that's their, if you're like a beta psychology, your ideal is to feel like you're part of the right team, the winning team, that you're supporting the good guys. And that's, a huge percentage of people fall into that drive. And so to have so many elements where people aren't confident or don't feel like they can succeed or get the same opportunities, then people, don't get behind movements if they don't feel like they understand them or trust the characters or what they're being told. So it's just that's what I think is, where the MAGA is really good, is the, make America great, and to focus on the good things and the things that unify us and bring us together, and the common things that we share in common, as opposed to the model that I feel like people really focus on what are our differences, and what are the things where you're not like me and we can't get along, as opposed to looking at all the things that are similar.
Thank you. That's really an interesting analysis, and I think you're right. It's our education system, I mean, I was striving to learn things when I went to school, and I'm afraid a lot of people are just trying to get that diploma and then go out and be a part of the big machine, and get that 30-year mortgage and get on the treadmill, and suddenly you're 60 or 70 years old, and you look back and you say, wow, that's all I did. I just worked for that company for all that time, and they didn't even give me a gold watch.
Yeah.
It is dystopian, and we've all, a lot of us have listened to Yuri Bezmenov, the Russian that explained to us all about how the uh, the 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 effort of the Soviet intelligence services was not so much to come here and steal secrets, or but to develop this dystopia, so that we would no longer have either the will to do it or the ability to make a good choice, as you were just saying so well. It's a real puzzle, but I think you're right. The hope is in learning these family connections and learning, for instance, I saw just right before the show, I looked at my X feed, and somebody was from the liberal side was recommending that they take Pritzker into a Senate committee to bust Trump, because he would know a lot about Trump that they could bust him with. But from what you said, he'd be busting himself if he were to get into all the details. So, and then people don't realize, that their heroes are just as covered in mud as Donald Trump.
Well, a lot of people don't get to make choices that are good choices, and they're have to choose between two or more bad or not great things. And so there are very few people that I feel like are in a position where they really have that. And I don't think many of the politicians are. I mean, you talked about the Andy Craig's book and the presidential puppetry, and how the strategy is to have a front man and somebody that captures a lot of attention. So the people in the background, you look at, the lead singer in the, when you go to the concert, you focus all on the person that's under the spotlight, and, so that you can run other operations. So a lot of things are for distraction. And my other big criticism is omission of information, and not, clarifying or having understanding on events or things. Like I was talking to my parents last night about like Iran Contra, because so many of the Iran Contra characters are the IP3 characters, which was the Middle East Marshall Plan, and so many crossover characters. But I feel like if you ask people like what Iran Contra was, who the key people and characters are, I feel like there's no understanding of that. And and literally the George Bush "I was out of the loop" becomes like the tagline for it, and then we're like, well, he's out of the loop, I'm out of the loop too. And it's too confusing for me to get involved, so I'm gonna go watch the Lions.
And Ollie North, I guess nobody talks about Ollie North anymore.
He was in the NRA with David Keene. He was his banker was Stefan Halper, who's was the Crossfire Hurricane informant that worked with Richard Dearlove. And he's the son-in-law of Ray Klein, who's right in the mix with all the Hellwell and Ted Shackley and all the operator guys. He was in the mix with all of them.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to go back just for a moment to Cornelius Vanderbilt.
Vanderstar.
You mentioned Vanderstar, and you also mentioned the Commodore Hotel at the top of the show. Mm-hmm. So both of those references bring in the great Cornelius Vanderbilt himself to my mind. Mm-hmm. And I have not ever really felt that Cornelius Vanderbilt, while he was tough and he would do whatever he could to get an advantage, I don't see him involved in organized crime. But then here comes organized crime after, whenever his power wanes. And so what are you familiar with Vanderbilt enough to say whether he was also making deals with the Chicago mob?
Well, so we've done the Grand Central Station tour twice, which is amazing. And that was the Commodore's project. And he's the Commodore because he was originally a ferry captain between Staten Island and Manhattan. So he has a background in, water transportation, and then of course the railroads as well. But, that's the Commodore Hotel is right next to Grand Central Station. This brings in like Clint Murchison and Sid Richardson hiring the chairman, John McCloy, to help them do the New York Central Penn Station or Pennsylvania Railroad merger. So that's the Pan Am building is right next to Grand Central Station. That was where Eli Black goes flying out of the Pan Am building. There's a lot of New York Central Railroad has a lot of interesting history, and Pennsylvania Railroad, of course, as well. So, as far as like the Pritzker connection, like the thing that I look at more is the Czechoslovakian angle, because you had the Thomas Masaryk that comes to Chicago with Edward Benesch in the teens, and then starts working with Robert Lansing and Charles Crane to get Czechoslovakia recognized as a country. And Masaryk had this intelligence network with the the European language speakers. So he was in Chicago, and then of course becomes the first president of Czechoslovakia, and then Beneš becomes the second um, one, and then that's their original group was the Mafia. It was the 2F Mafia when they were before they were anti-Habsburg people, and um, the Beneshes are interesting because the Ava moved to Bloomington, and then her aunt is the wife of Zbigniew Brzezinski, and then Madeline Albright. The Albright family is related to the McCormicks and the Middells, so that's the Chicago Tribune family. So there's a lot of these intelligence networks that go from Czechoslovakia to Chicago, and then like I said, then Julius Klein seems to take over that role, working with the Chicago papers, and then Max is in Michigan, seems to be the follow-on from that. So it's it's a lot. Like I feel like I know the Detroit side very well. And I've looked at the Chicago, but it's, I don't know it as well. So I, have to keep studying.
Well, you certainly know it better than 99% of us already. I know that you will study it and get more out of your amazing studies.
Do you want the personal anecdote that I suspect is completely related to all this? My failed interview with the Lazard Frere Bank in the 56th floor of the Rockefeller Center.
Yeah.
So that was set up by my mom's sorority sister, who was a cantor, and their family had they were CPAs from Chicago, and Burton Cantor was the accountant with Paul Hellewell when they set up the Castle Bank and Trust. So when I went to the interview at Lazard, it was from the Cantor recommendation, and she actually passed away a couple of years ago. It was one of my first friends. So they're in Woodlawn Cemetery in Detroit with a lot of very famous Detroiters. And the thing my mom told me is that she didn't know they had a Jewish background. Of course, the cantor is the singer in the synagogue, and they were a fur trading company from Mackinac Island before they came.
Wow.
They were a Jewish, Mackinac to Detroit, and then they became, and of course there's Cantor Fitzgerald, which is the trading company that was wiped out from 9/11. If people remember, that was different spelling, a C instead of a K, but it just, again, just like ties into the Michigan State Vietnam thing that with DM. They sent the people from Michigan State were advising DM on, financial policy and diplomatic policy. And so that, is just one of the many like uncomfortable connections. But, for me personally, it was so embarrassing to not be hired because, it was like my mom's friend and everything. And I did not know about the Rockefeller Foundation being there with the British Security Coordination. I learned that all much later, but that's my part of the reason why I can remember this stuff very specifically is because I have specific, Rockefeller Center disappointments that I remember.
Well, it's time to wrap it up, David. I'm going to share a comment from our very good friend Corky Goss, who says, MAGA versus Uni Party. May the box shaking continue. That's where the hope is to me, is that, let's recognize that there's this thinner party that crosses party lines all the time, engages in these activities of which are either criminal or at least fraudulent to rip off the American people again and again and again. There has to be hope somewhere, and Corky, I think you're supplying it for a lot of us. Let's just keep pressing on the MAGA issues and try to keep Trump pressing as well to restore what we think of as the American dream. So that's my closing comments. Anything from you, David?
Well, I'm hopeful that there'll be a good resolution, and that he will be. It's a hard situation, and that I feel like there's but it is for the he is the sworn-in president to defend the Constitution of the United States. So it should be his duty to work on these issues and help the American people have understanding so that they can be vigilant citizens that feel confident and proud and feel like they can understand and make good decisions, which I think most people can.
Well, David, I wish I could spend 2 or 3 hours with you when we do these shows, but I'm afraid my mental energy wears out after an hour. And so I'm going to play it safe and say thank you again for a really interesting interview. And I look forward to the next time. David Cranmer, Underdown.
Thank you very much.
You can find him on Twitter, folks. He's really prolific there and a lot of fun to watch. Thanks, David.
Thanks, John.
Bye-bye.